We are now going to start Lesson 1's Inquiry 1.1, Describing and Naming Organisms. So your assignment says for you to watch this video from Ms. Tittle, and I will go through on this video and show you how to perform the lab. You also will have to go to Carolina Science online textbook and read What's in an Organism's Name on page 10 to 15 to help you with this lab. So what I'm going to do is take you to the science textbook first, and we're going to go back to the procedures for Inquiry 1.1. All right here are the procedures. These are just the step-by-step instructions that let you know what to do during the lab. The first procedure says, follow your teacher's directions for identifying the physical characteristics of each organism pictured on the organism photo cards. In your lesson on Schoology, you have one of the items that says organism photo cards. And it will be a Google slideshow that looks like this. And within it, you will type in your name on your cards. And then you will go to each card and you will look at the picture. And right under here where it says characteristics, you will write down just a couple of characteristics about what you see in the picture. Now if I look closely at this picture right here, and I'm going to put it in present mode so you can see it bigger. If I look closely at this picture, it looks like little tiny green leaves that are floating in water. So I might think, this might be a plant that lives in the water. It might be an aquatic plant. So over here under characteristics, I would type in that it's green. I might type in that it has tiny leaves. I might type that it lives in water. So you're going to do that for each one of the organisms. So I'm just going to go through each of the different organisms. Here's the second card. So again, you just look at the picture, type in a few characteristics about the organism. We know what these things are, but again, pretend like you don't know. This is a new organism that's never been discovered before. So you might talk about how they have eyes, they have arms and legs. It looks as if there's male and female versions of these organisms. They have hair. Just some general characteristics, even though you know that they're humans. Okay, look at these plants closely and write down a few characteristics. Color, size, shape, texture, those kinds of things are what we're looking for characteristics or traits. Here's another. And another plant. Another plant. And that's all of them. So once you have done that for each one of the photo cards, then let's go back to our directions. Second step says, with your class, read what's in an organism's name on pages 10 to 15. So I would just turn in my book and I would read pages 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. I would read those. And as you see, most of these pages, or some of these pages, just have pictures on them, so it's really not as much reading as what you would think. When you read this, there's a few things I really want you to notice. I want you to understand and notice what this word taxonomy means. Taxonomy is the science of naming and classifying living things. I want you to be able to recognize who this person is. His name is Carolus Linnaeus. He is talked about in this paragraph right here and a little bit more throughout the article, but he is a scientist who is known for coming up with the science of taxonomy. Back in the early 1700s is when he did his studies. I also want you to notice this chart right here. It looks like an upside down triangle. If you'll notice on it, it tells us the 7 levels of classification. You have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. The kingdom level is the broadest category. It is a big grouping that contains a lot of different kinds of organisms. Like in the example right here, it's using the animal kingdom as the example. Well, we know that there are thousands of different types of animals. So that's a very broad kingdom. Another kingdom would be like the plant kingdom. There's actually several kingdoms that I want you to know about, so I'm going to mention them. There's the animal kingdom and plant kingdom, like we just mentioned. But there's also a kingdom called fungi, which has mushrooms and molds and stuff like that in it. There is a kingdom called protist, which has little tiny microorganisms, like some that we might study this year are going to be amoeba and paramecium and euglena and algae. Things like that are protist. Another kingdom is the eubacteria, and eubacteria are just the general little bacteria that we know of, like streptococcus, which we know better known as strep throat. It causes strep throat. But there's a lot of different kinds of regular bacterias. But then there is the sixth kingdom. It's called archaebacteria. Now, archaebacteria are bacteria that live in really extreme environments. So once again, there are 6 kingdoms: the animal, plant, fungi, protist, eubacteria, and archaebacteria. Okay, so there are 6 kingdoms of all living things, and so every living thing will be in one of those 6 kingdoms. But if we take the kingdom level and go down the chart in this direction, like this arrow shows, we are increasing in similarity. So that means things that are in the kingdom might have some things in common. If they're in the same phylum, then they have even more things in common. If they're in the same class, they have even more in common. Orders have even more in common than the class does. Families have even more. Genus has even more. And when you get down to the species level, you have the most specific and most unique organisms that only belong to that one group. Like in this example, they're using the animal kingdom. Well, if you look inside the animal kingdom, they've got mentioned as some examples: the domestic cat, the tiger, the lion, the gray wolf, the cheetah, the human, and the dog. Well, if we take the lion as our example, and we're trying to take it through all these categories, the lion is also in the phylum Chordata, which means it has a backbone, spinal cord. It's in the class Mammalia, the lion is, because it has fur, it has mammary glands, it gives birth to live young. It's in the order Carnivora because it's one of the types of mammals that are carnivores, which means they eat meat. It's in the family Felidae. Felidae is the family that contains cats, all the different kinds of cats. And then if you take it down to the genus level, it's in the genus called Panthera. And there's only a few things that belong to the genus Panthera. In this example, they've got the tiger and the lion. Now, if you think about tigers and lions, they have a lot of things in common. They're not the same type of organism, but they do have a lot of things in common. They're very closely related. And then if you're down at the species level, you have one individual type of species, like in this case, the lion. So that's why this chart right here is very important. So as you're reading, pay attention to that chart. And then on this page, here's another very important chart that I want you to pay attention to. In each of these 7 classification levels, the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species levels, you are, or scientists have identified and have come up with scientific type of names for these organisms.
Teachers,
sorry for the interruption.
Parents picking up their Chromebooks, they will need to complete their paperwork. We had talked this morning about meeting.
Sorry for the interruption. The intercom came on, so I had to pause for a moment. But where we got to is we were saying that scientists come up with these different names that they give organisms so they can group them. If scientists did not group the organisms into these different classification levels, then there would be a lot of confusion out in the world. So let's take a look at just a few different organisms we have listed here. The domestic cat, which is just our pet cats we might have as little kitty cats. Lion, cheetah, tiger, dog, and we're talking about just the domestic dog like you would have as a pet also, gray wolf, and human. Okay, if we look on this chart, they are all in the same kingdom. They all have something in common. They are all animals. Okay, if we look at the next level, they also are all in the same phylum. They're in the phylum Chordata. And we know by just thinking about just general knowledge about these organisms that they do have a backbone and spinal cord. So they are chordate type of animals. Okay, if we look next under class, they're all in the same class. These are all mammals, but if we think about them, we know that they're all mammals because think about their characteristics. They have hair, they have mammary glands, which produce milk for the young. They give birth to live young. And there's many, many other characteristics that make them mammals. Those are just some of the top ones that I mentioned. So we know they have that in common. If we look at the order level, we see that almost every one of these is a carnivore, which means they eat meat. But then we have the humans, which are in the order primates. We belong to the order primates because we have more in common with primates than we do cats, dogs, and things like that. That does not mean that we're necessarily the same creature or that we necessarily evolved from the same thing. What that's just saying is we have more in common. Our characteristics are more like primates than they are the carnivores. And then we look at the family level. We have several that are in Felidae, which means, like we talked about earlier, that they're cats. We have a few that are Canidae and canines. You might know that means dogs or dog-like. And then Hominidae is what family the humans are in. And Hominidae is a family that has characteristics a lot like we do. Everything in that group usually walk upright on two legs. They have opposable thumbs. They have more complex thinking skills and stuff like that. So that's the order, or family Hominidae. Now, if you look at the genus level, this is where we start to see a lot of things that are not in common. We do have a few that belong to the same groups. And I'm not going to mention that. I'm going to let you look for yourself because we do have an assessment question later that's going to ask you about that. But you can look and see which ones would belong to the same group. That means they have a lot in common. And then if you look at the species level, they have nothing in common. They're all in different species. That's because these are different organisms. They are different species. The domestic cat is not exactly the same as a lion, and the domestic cat's not exactly the same as the cheetah, and so forth. None of these are exactly the same. They are separate individual species. Now, if you'll look closely, the genus and species names are written in a little bit different print. That type of print is called italics. If we were going to type the scientific name or genus and species name of an organism, we would type it in italics. If we were going to write it on a piece of paper with a pen or pencil, we would write it and then we would underline it. Underlining it means that it is a proper name, and in this case, it's a scientific name. So if we're talking about the scientific name of, let's say, the domestic cat, its scientific name would be Felis sylvestris. And there's a proper way to write that besides just italics. The genus name always starts with a capital letter, as you see here, the capital F in Felis. And the species name is always written in lowercase. So you see Sylvestris does not have an uppercase letter. So the scientific name of the cat would be its genus and species name together, which would be Felis sylvestris. Okay, let's move on. Okay, it's going to go into detail about that all throughout the reading passage.